Hello GRC community, and welcome to another video tutorial to help you get started with ServiceNow's applications. My name is Eric Ferron in Santa Clara, California. And first, I want to wish you all well in these uncertain times. I hope that you're all safe and in good health. Today with me is Marie Fernandez, who is a Senior Education Advisor, a GRC specialist who is contracting with ServiceNow. Hello, Anne-Marie, and also I hope that you are well.
Hello, Eric. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here with you all. Yes, and thank you. I'm doing well, and I'm looking forward to this tutorial.
Many of you will already know Anne-Marie, since you may have taken your GRC classes with her like I did. And today, Anne-Marie is with us to tell all about compliance scoring. So, Anne-Marie, why do we want to talk about compliance scoring and how we're going to approach this today?
Well, Eric, in my experience teaching GRC to hundreds of people, I have found that compliance scoring is a simple concept that really clarifies and brings home the idea as to why entity scoping is so important. It really helps to summarize and shine a light on all the work that can go into setting up the GRC application. GRC is not a plug-and-play piece of software, and a number of concepts need to be mastered before one gets that aha moment that brings the story of the product together. And compliance scoring is one of those concepts and tools that makes what we do tangible and real. One of the big insights of compliance scoring is really the importance and the actual simplicity of entity scoping. So I want to share this with the audience today. We'll quickly review the definition of compliance scoring. Then I will take us through a simple example to explain how the score is calculated. And then we'll do a quick product demo before some final recommendations.
This sounds very enticing. So let me get us started with a couple of refresher slides. As usual, this tutorial is part of what we call the Get Started with GRC series. So it's really aimed at people and organizations in the early stages of implementation. We want to make sure that you have the knowledge and tools to quickly realize value from the product. And in the future, we will have more tutorials for the more advanced people and organizations. This is a heavy slide, and we will not review it in detail. It's here so that you can print it and keep it as a cheat sheet, if you will. It shows and provides some definitions on the most critical concepts of GRC and how they complement each other. The topic for today, compliance scoring, is at the bottom here in the evaluate sections, but it's tightly related to entities and entity scoping, and Anne-Marie is going to show how. Enough of me for now. Anne-Marie, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
So to set the scene, let's start with a very simple definition of compliance scoring. For a single control objective, compliance scoring is very simply the percentage of controls that are compliant. But this is also very powerful because you can quickly assess your overall compliance posture. You immediately get a complete view of the areas of compliance and non-compliance in your company. It enables proactive organizational compliance monitoring, as well as evidence collection and reporting. This granular level at the entity level is a very powerful way to gain insights and will open the door to such things as compliance monitoring, collection of evidence, and of course, reporting. So let's take a look at how this works. So without ServiceNow and the entities construct, most GRC tools will allow you to reconcile authority and internal policy to the control objectives that support it. That provides a lot of value. However, the problem is that we don't know where, and that is what people, places, or things in the organization are compliant or not compliant. So if an audit is based on this level of data, it will fail the organization if only one part of the organization is found non-compliant, because we don't know where else in the company there may have been a breakdown. So essentially, the entire company will fail the control objective. It's a binary pass-fail. In other words, there's no visibility past the control objective.
All right, so it's a very blunt instrument.
With the creation of entities, we have a more nuanced result. We can slice the organization into smaller and much more manageable parts according to the right ownership and accountability for every specific control objective. A control is created for each entity, so we have the ability to assign a control owner proactively. Now, not only do we understand the parts of the organization that are responsible for the overall control objective, but we have established and distributed the accountability. So with entities, we pass-fail at the granular control level, not at the company control objective level. Essentially, we take the pass-fail of all the controls, combine them to give an overall compliance score. So there's no longer a pass-fail system, at the company level, but a more mature grading on a continuous scale. This also allows us to know exactly where our weaknesses are and take the appropriate actions to achieve full compliance.
All right, so we get a compliance score in this case of 2/3, which is 67%. And we see that one of the entities on the control has failed. So far, conceptually, it's very simple and easy.
It really is, isn't it? So let's have a look at an example of how this would look in real life. So we have the authority, the NIST 853, which says that the organization develops, documents, and disseminates a media protection policy. Then we have an internal policy that says records and media management requires at some point that these be destroyed after their retention period has expired. Then we have a control objective, which says establish and maintain electronic storage media management procedures. That is operationally what needs to be done in the company for the company to be compliant with both the external authority and internal policy. But now we ask ourselves, how do we distribute responsibility? Let's say we have decided in our entity scoping exercise for this control objective to assign control ownership along its key departments, because this is where we find the most adequate ownership, the head of the departments. Each department is an entity. So far, so good?
Yep, this is very clear.
Now, every one of these entities has to meet the demands of the control objective with its own control, which is derived from the overall control objective. When these controls are tested, let's say during an audit for the sake of the exercise, we find that one is not yet ready to be addressed. We'll talk about this later. We will also find that one fails and two pass. So 2/3 of the control pass. This gives us a compliance score of 2/3 or 67%. Now note that if we had not had the entities approach, if the organization had been one single monolithic structure, the test for the control objective would have given a result of fail and no indication as to where or why.
That's very cool. However, I suspect that things can also get a little more complicated than this, right?
Yes, things can get a little more sophisticated and useful, actually. So let's take a look into more detail at what is behind the compliance score number. So compliance score is derived from the sum of the weights of the compliant controls over the sum of the total weights of the active controls. So let's take a look back at our example. In GRC, the state of the control also matters. As you know, controls have to go through a number of states, namely draft, attest, review, monitor, and retire. If this isn't fully clear to you, there's a link at the bottom of the slide that will take you to the controls tutorial. But for now, I'll assume that we are all comfortable with this. Each of the controls will be in different states, simply because each of these departments will have their own constraints and timetables. In this example, customer support is just getting their procedures in place, so we won't count them in the compliance score. Finance, HR, and IT, however, have their procedures in place, so their scores will be counted. As far as compliance scoring is concerned, to keep it all fair and exact, we simply remove from the calculations those entities and controls that are in draft or retire stages. They just don't participate in the calculation. Also, entities do not have to have the same importance when it comes to evaluating compliance to a control objective. In this example, for this control objective, we decide that IT is much more important than the other departments, so we give it a weight 3 times higher, say 30. Now we see whether each control is pass or fail. Customer support is still in the draft state, remember, so it's not counted in the calculation. Finance has some issues, so it failed, gives a value of 0. HR and IT have no issues, so they are compliant, which gives us 10 and 30 respectively. The whole thing divided by the maximum number of value is 10, 10, 30, resulting in simply 80%. That is the compliance score for this organization for this control objective. So the organization did not fail the entire control objective, and we didn't have to wait for an audit to know this. We now know that something needs to be addressed in the finance department in order to be fully compliant at company level.
This is brilliant. It's very simple and straightforward. So now let's have a look at how it works in the ServiceNow product itself. I think you got a little demo for us, right?
Yep. This is a control objective that at a company level specifying a particular activity that supports a policy. So in this case, it's supporting a business records and media management policy, as well as a citation, which is a specific paragraph from a particular authority. And in this case, it's the NIST 853 authority. Typically, without entities at a company level, what it's saying is that we need to establish and maintain electronic management procedures. This control objective, this score is not possible. Essentially, the way that we will find out whether we are as a company compliant with this control objective that supports this policy and this citation of NIST is that an auditor will come in and audit the various groups that have a procedure. If they find one group that is not compliant with the procedure, the entire company will fail that control objective. Now, that's obviously not desirable. So with entities, what happens is that we are able to then establish granularity at a lower level, at an operational level. So in this case, what we're doing is we're establishing proactively control owners. The way that we do that in ServiceNow is that we are going to scope out this control objective. That means trying to understand who in the organization, that means people, places, or things, how are we going to establish ownership? In this case, let's just say we want to establish ownership by the department heads for those groups that are subject to NIST. So I have an entity type set up here. In this case, you'll see the NIST departments. And again, those are the departments that are subject to NIST audits. And let's just take a look at the entity type for a second. So if I open that up, you'll see here that underneath this entity type, there are 4 entities: customer support, finance, IT, and HR. In ServiceNow, in order to establish control ownership or to generate controls, we need to click this magic box, which is creates controls automatically. Once I save that, we are essentially establishing control ownership by those NIST departments. So if we just wait a second and reload, we shall see that there are 4 controls being generated. When we look at these 4 controls, they essentially say the exact same thing that the control objective is saying, which is establish and maintain electronic storage and media management procedures. The actual name of the control is identical because everybody's essentially supporting that same control objective for their area. So each of these departments have their part in the overall compliance score at a company level. So let's take a look at that, how that's established. So first, what I'm going to do is move all these controls to the attest phase, select all of them and click attest. What we have to do is get these control owners to attest to the fact that this control is in place, because why start to measure it if that control is not in place? So first we have to establish that this control is in fact in place for each of the departments. So first I'm going to log in as Rob Woodburn. He's the first control owner for customer support. He's received an attestation. So I'm going to log in as Rob Woodburn and go to my attestations here. And he's going to complete this first attestation. And essentially what it's asking him is this control implemented for your area, which is customer support, and for this control objective? So he's going to say right now for customer support, it's not applicable. We are not subject to NIST for whatever reason. So he's just going to say that's not applicable for customer support and hit submit. Let's take a look at what happened to the actual compliance score. So in this case, at the control objective, nothing essentially changed. And that's because controls that are not applicable or are retired do not count in the overall score here. So let's complete the rest of the attestations for the rest of the areas. So first I'm going to log in as finance, so as Natasha Ingram, and complete that attestation for her area. So I'm going to take this first one here. And what she's going to say is that, no, this control objective is not implemented in my area. And maybe they'll say legacy system to be replaced. This control will be non-compliant until the new system is implemented. So they may choose to submit a policy exception in order to ensure that there's traceability and there's transparent awareness of exactly what's happening with that particular control objective in that area. Let's go back to that control objective. It's still 0. We have 1 non-compliant and the compliance score is 0. As you can see, the IT department and the HR department still have not even confirmed whether this control is implemented in their areas. So let's go ahead and complete the attestations for each of these areas. So I'm going to log in as David Liu and log in as Mariano, and we'll just go ahead and say that those controls are implemented in their area. So first we're going to do Mariano, go to my attestations, and take that attestation there and say, yes, it is implemented. I'm going to attach a screenshot of the procedure, for example, but I'm just going to pick any attachment here and we'll say implemented January 30th, 2019, and I'm going to submit that. Let's take a look at who's outstanding. So in this case, the person that still needs to complete the attestation is David Liu. So I'm going to log in as David Liu. So here's the attestation. I'm going to take the assessment and say yes, and attach evidence to show that this control is in place. So we see that that is accurate, and just say implemented last year, February 2, 2019. All right, so we'll go ahead and submit that. And now let's take a look at what happened to the overall compliance score. So when we take a look at that control objective, it still says 0. There is a scheduled job that needs to run. So we can go ahead and force that scheduled job to run. The scheduled job that you want to look for is called the compliance score. I'm going to go ahead and execute that now. Normally this will run every 2 hours, but I'm going to go ahead and execute that now. And we're going to wait for just a second for that compliance score to update. Now let's go back to that control objective. Now we see that the control objective has been updated, and now we see that that control compliance score is 67%. And that's because the formula that's happening here is the sum of the weights of the sum of the compliant controls, which is 10 and 10, over the total sum of all the controls that are applicable. So not applicable doesn't count. If they were retired, it wouldn't count. And so in this case, what we're going to do is it's 20 divided by 30 equals 67%. Now, just to show you that compliance score is also affected by control weighting, let's just say the IT control is a key control, in that if this is compliant or not compliant, it should really affect the control more. So I'm going to change the weighting. It's uneditable right now. I'm going to return this to draft, and I'm going to change this weighting to 30 and go ahead and hit update. Because I moved it to draft, I now need to redo the attestation. So this attestation is going to go, another one is going to go out to David Liu. I'm going to impersonate David Liu, complete that attestation. There's the attestation, hit take assessment. And I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to say, yes, it's implemented, attach evidence, and then we'll say implemented to 2019. All right, so we're going to go ahead and submit that. Now let's take a look at how that weighting affected the overall compliance score. So if we go to the control objective, as you can see, it's not yet updated. So again, we're going to execute the compliance score so we can immediately see the effect without having to wait 2 hours. And as you can see, the compliance score updated. So in this case, you will see the formula is the sum of the compliance scores, which is 40 over 50 equals 80%.
Thank you for this, Anne-Marie. So here's the most important lesson I draw from this. For me, it seems that compliance scoring is really a beautiful tool to keep your organization compliant and identify the areas that need to be improved. But it all relies on getting the entities set up in the most useful and powerful way for your organization. So this is really where lots of preparation work and effort should take place. There's quite a lot of useful resources about entities and entity scoping that I encourage all of you here to review attentively. There are some links at the bottom of this slide.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Eric. Entities are the key to it all. And I'll mention that I'll soon be sharing on the community an entity scoping template. It's a tool that I use in class that the students sometimes find pretty useful.
And now we're coming to the end of this tutorial. And Marie, what would you advise our audience to do like right now, like very specifically as soon as this video is over?
Well, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of entities to get the best from the compliance scoring. So I would simply start there. Review the distribution of ownership for all your control objectives and confirm that you have the right level of entities. Put a placeholder in your calendar to hold a scoping workshop with your team and stakeholders. And of course, make sure that you are all fully on top of the concepts of entities and controls by reviewing the tutorials we mentioned in the slides today.
Well, thank you for this, Anne-Marie. We are now at the end of the tutorial. A couple of reminders before we close. All the links that were mentioned will be available, of course, in the PDF version of the slides that will be posted in the forum. And we absolutely want to hear from you. Please ask your questions in the GRC forum. You will get answers within minutes, or even better, come and share with us what it is that you've learned. Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your time and for sharing all this important information with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and to everyone, if you made it that far, thank you for your time and attention, and please stay safe and healthy, and goodbye.
Goodbye.